assume I'm still audible. I prefer to take PIs in chat, please. When workers are completely beholden to one employer that has almost complete control over their income and over their life, they have no bargaining power, they have no ability to improve their situation, and they have no ability to rise out of poverty. This world, which, where people have multiple jobs, is a world where workers can actually argue to get better pay, to get better conditions, and they can collectivize to a much greater extent. That is why we will win at opening government. I'm going to bring 4 things in the speech. Firstly, some brief points of setup. Then I'm going to explain how we increase bargaining power, most important outcome in the debate. Secondly, thirdly, how we increase independently the worker quality of life and quality of work as well. And finally, talking about other impacts in the debate, such as productivity and social work that is increased on our side. So let's talk about setup. I think the first thing to note is this is a huge change in norms of the status quo. It requires some creativity from teens and the panel to imagine what this world would look like. Things like the way in which the union movement was established and evolved, and the things that it campaigned for would probably be vastly different. So arguments can be made about, it'd be harder, they'd overwork you more, you'd do lots more things, and you'd spend more hours at all these different jobs. Consider the impact of years of bargaining against the new different world in which people were working on. In fact, the very meaning of work is likely to mean different things to people in this world, and it's probably going to be less in importance to them. That is probably a good thing. The second thing just to note here is that I think in the status quo, having multiple jobs is a normal thing, and it's a normal thing for poor people. The problem with that is it's not a thing that is accepted by society. It's not something where they have any power to improve their conditions. If we bring rich people and middle-class people in line with that norm, we think it saves everyone, improves the conditions for everyone. So firstly, how do we increase worker bargaining power? I would note that this is an unlocker for pretty much all the material in the debate, because if workers can argue for what they want, they're much more likely to get things that are good for them. So how do we improve that? 6 ways. Firstly, just very simply, one company does not control your life. You can survive on having 2 jobs for a while. If your 3rd job fires you, that's pretty good, because it means you're no longer under the constant threat of being fired and losing your entire income, particularly if you're on the poverty line, if you have multiple children and you're a single mother trying to keep care of them. But the second thing to note is that workers all have lots of different jobs and they're able to communicate. And note that workers all have lots of different jobs. They might be in the same industry, they might be in different industries, but importantly, they can communicate whether they're being exploited in this job compared to their other jobs. They're both from their personal experience, but also from the experience of others. Thirdly, your boss no longer has the ability to destroy your self-worth and your ability to even want to fight for bargaining, for better conditions in the first place. Because you have 2 other bosses that might be praising you, or have a competitive incentive to praise you more than your other jobs, you stay with them and instead of leaving the other job, that means you're more likely to actually stick up for yourself when you see that, hey, this work is comparatively worse than my other job. That is something that I should fight about. Fourthly, you're just constantly comparing everything in your life to those other jobs. And that's not just a static thing, it's over time, right? You have multiple jobs at once, but also multiple jobs in the future. Fifthly, and this is, I think, a pretty crucial one that I outlined in setup, rich people are bargaining too as well, right? Like when you have your lawyers and your doctors also taking multiple jobs, maybe those jobs are in, the same industries as each other, but maybe they're not. In that case, you're much more likely to get the sorts of outcomes that would be beneficial for poor workers. Because I know legislation can affect all workers generally, even if it's just one group of people that bargains for it. The final mechanism here is just note, I think there is a vast increase in union membership. That is because you can now join 3 unions instead of 1 union. Someone who is likely to join a union is now more likely to join lots of them. Just because you're in a job for less time doesn't make you any less likely to join that union, because you still see the positive impact that it has on your life. Membership increases, but I also just think the tools available to unions increase as well, because comparatively that union has higher bargaining power to companies who don't have as much control over each individual worker for the reasons given above as well. What are the outcomes at this point? It enables all the better conditions that matter in this debate: higher worker pay, larger breaks, more sick leave, more maternity leave, less overworking and exploitation, particularly in the developing world. These things could happen on either side of the house, but they're much more likely to happen on our side of the house. Secondly, let's talk about independently of that, some outcomes in terms of work quality of life and work. I will firstly, though, take a POI from closing if they have one. Opening. Cool. All right. So why does worker quality of life increase? Firstly, worker satisfaction. David, you have one.
Yeah, so most people have worked multiple jobs in their lives, and they also have friends and family who they can talk to. So what is the exclusivity of all of the set of mechanisms you've given about comparing your outcomes to other outcomes?
Because they don't have the, so firstly, they don't have the connections in the same capacity of working 8 hours a day together, or 4 hours a day together every day. But also the stage in life where they work multiple jobs is usually when they're quite young and they don't know what is going on around them. When they're empowered, middle-aged people who can push for changes, at this point in time, they're still working multiple jobs. That's when the mechanisms become incredibly exclusive. So work quality of life and work, like even if it's not exclusive, it's obviously much better on our side of the house as well. Work quality of life. First thing, higher satisfaction. You can now pursue multiple jobs, have different interests. Even if you're only interested in one thing, it's super boring to have to do that one thing or the same task for 8 hours a day, or 10 or 12 hours a day every day. Much better if you're able to do lots of jobs. Most people have multiple passions. They can follow those. That's good. They can also see what they like and see what they don't like and improve upon that. Secondly, you meet more people. You might be stuck in the status quo with one set of work friends who you hate, but you're just stuck with them because those are the people that you're with. At least now you can meet more people. You can choose to spend time outside of work with the ones that you liked more. Thirdly, you can iterate your work over time to shape it and mold it towards your interests. You get a taste of what is going to be a better job in the future, and you follow yourself to get that. Fourth, it is much more flexible. You can take breaks or leave from one job. For instance, if you have a baby, but your country doesn't have a good maternity leave policy, you can take leave from one job and sacrifice that income in the short term without getting fired from your other jobs. That's probably good. Fifth, your work overall is seen as less of a certainty and a purpose in your life. It's not something you have to do. It fulfills you as a person. It's much better on that side of the house. And final thing to note is if you're in a difficult job, like you're working as an emergency worker, like in an ambulance, you don't have to do it all the time. You can take breaks. You can probably recuperate a bit. That's probably good for your mental health. I would note not all of these mechanisms are tipping points in their own respective situations. They make people's work quality, they make the worst parts of work go away, and they make people much more happy as a result. Let's talk about productivity and social work. First mechanism, you flow on from all this job satisfaction from the other points, you're probably going to be a happier worker, a better worker. Secondly, the exposure to different perspectives is probably good. If you're an engineer who also does some commerce work, that means you can improve the commerce capacity of your engineering firm. That's probably pretty good. But the final thing to note is you're more likely to do NGO work. There's going to be a large norm shift to people doing charity work in their third job, which is probably good because those people would just not take the risk in the first instance in the status quo. That means you get much more work that does good things. For all of those reasons, so proud to govern.
Great, thank you, PM. Please go ahead, Elo.
Okay. All right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2. Oh, also, just before I start, POIs through voice, please. I'm not going to be checking the chat. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. There's a very simple reason why we don't do this in the real world. It's because it would be fucking stressful and awful and horrible for our ability to specialize in certain skills. What is a setup? I just want to point out that in either world, there are many mechanisms to counteract the risk of losing your job. First, you have friends and family who work different jobs who can support you. This is true even of very poor people because poverty is highly seasonal and cyclical. When you're poor, your friends might have a good harvest, etc., and vice versa. Second, you have personal savings. If, as they say, the risk of getting laid off or the risk of having a shitty job is so high, you will save. Moreover, there are social programs like unemployment insurance or unemployment checks that are available even in the vast majority of developing states. This means they need to show that these mechanisms are insufficient to access benefits about lowering the risk of unemployment. These mechanisms also demonstrate that workers have bargaining power with their employers because they can't afford to temporarily quit jobs and look for new jobs. Also, as we say, most people have worked multiple jobs and they have friends and family who have worked different jobs, so they're able to make effective comparisons. They don't demonstrate why this is insufficient to access the benefits of if you work in a shady job going somewhere else, because presumably if you worked 5 jobs across your life, the marginal difference between that and working 15 jobs is not like that much more optionality. So 3 arguments in my speech. First, on less job satisfaction, there are 3 reasons why this is true. First, because your tasks are split up. You're more likely to be handing off tasks to different people. For example, you work for 3 hours and then the next person takes over rather than working on the same task for 8 hours. You get far less satisfaction because you're less likely to work that task to completion and feel as though you've accomplished something at the end of the workday. Moreover, you're switching between totally different type of tasks throughout the day or throughout the week because you're working totally different or different types of jobs. And you can't do this and you feel like you're never able to complete your job as a whole. Moreover, you're doing this increases the amount of responsibilities you are juggling, which is incredibly stressful because you are juggling like totally different responsibilities from different types of jobs. So you have to keep track of the different sorts of tasks that you're able to do versus focusing on one thing decreases the amount of effort that you have to put into just remembering what you're supposed to be doing at any given time, remembering where you're supposed to be. Weigh this against opening government's claim that you are less bored by working multiple roles. This is only true if the things that you are doing are at least somewhat interesting, and the problem is that you get bored as you do it all over again. But for the vast majority of people, most of the jobs that they work are going to be menial and uninteresting, not particularly difficult intellectual labor. So if you're switching from one boring task to another, the fact that you're doing multiple tasks does not make you engage more anymore. Second, on balancing competing job responsibilities. Within a corporation, you have one role and you focus on it. Or even if you have multiple roles, there's communication between the branches of the company, so there's no questions about where your responsibility lies at any given point. But when different companies are competing for your time, each one will ask you to prioritize your time over that of the others, which creates immense stress and pressure. If one job, for example, makes you do overtime, you can't then go to the other job where you have to deal with these totally different things. Third of all, I think it's harder to form relationships with people in your workplace. First, because you spend less time in each workplace. A lot of socialization is just about spending time and becoming familiar and comfortable with people. If you only see them 3 hours a day, that gives you fewer chances to make connections with them, versus on our side, you see the same people for longer. Also, there are more different people in each workplace. So rather than working with one other person, your time is split with less time spent with each individual person because each workplace now needs a lot of more people because nobody is working full time. Also, different workplaces are just going to have different social norms and different workplace cultures and atmospheres. So you constantly have to be switching and code switching and remembering which jokes are appropriate to make in one context, which aren't appropriate, who are the office politics that I need to keep track of. This is an incredibly stressful social environment. I think the impact here is first, the stress is horrible for your mental health and your physical health. This is linked to things like increased risks of heart attack, etc. Loneliness compounds this, and people spend most of their waking hours in their jobs anyway. So this is just a dramatic decrease in their quality of life. Second argument then, about how we have more political capital for laborers. We think that there are coalitions of employees. Yeah, I'll take a point. I'm closing.
Yeah, okay.
So these mechanisms don't necessarily lead up to your impact. Spending more time with the same people could also mean you're more frustrated with them, more likely to engage in conflicts, more likely to get sick of them.
I mean, that might be true, but I think most people most of the time don't get in conflicts with other people. And moreover, if you're more comfortable and familiar with people, it's also easier to resolve conflicts and be honest with them. Okay, now onto political capital. We think that coalitions of employees engage in voting on similar interests. The problem is now, one, there is a lot more issue bundling. Now, when you are working in 3 different jobs, you're working as a janitor, you're working in a factory, and you're working fixing cars, you have to bundle issues of you have to bundle a lot of different issues to vote on, and you can't focus and become a single issue voter on any one issue. So it's harder for you to actually express a clear set of preferences when you vote. It's harder for you to decide who you're going to vote for, and this often leads to more apathy or less responsive political system because it's harder for you to focus on any one specific issue and invest time in that issue. Moreover, you're less likely to join unions. First, this is given the mechanism about you're less likely to form social relationships. There's a couple things under this. First, the cost of joining each union is the same, right? The risk of strikes, you have to pay union dues, but the benefits are less on their side because each union only protects you in one of your 3 jobs. So the cost benefit analysis is against joining a union much more on their side. Also, unions require strong social buy-in to get people to join. Unions are a collective action problem where you get the benefits of strike and increased benefits, labor conditions, even if you personally aren't part of the union because policies change for everybody. So you need social shaming of people who don't join unions. You need to feel a strong connection to your coworkers and feel like you're in it together to feel that incentive not to cross the picket line. And it's a lot less likely to happen on their side of the house. Unions are one of the strongest mechanisms that workers have to be able to hold their people accountable. Unions often register people to vote and are another important tipping point for being able to access the vote and making corporations like politicians access to you. Finally, almost every single person now is likely to have at least one job where they have an interest in a large corporation that engages in some sort of negative externality. So whereas right now there are only small people working in the oil industry, there are a lot more people now who are likely to be working in that industry, working in polluting industries, just because of the fact that more people are working more jobs, which means more people now have an interest against regulating these industries and have an interest against being able to regulate these industries because they have a direct economic interest in maintaining their jobs. Third argument then on economic growth writ large. First, we think this obviously reduces specialization because each specific job often requires you to learn specific skills for that job and you have less time to be able to do so. But also because each job requires you to learn things like, for example, office politics. There are communication and coordination costs associated with working with many different people. And all of those increase when you are working multiple different jobs where you have more different people who have to get to know each other with less time to know each other and where tasks are being split among more and more people who now have to coordinate who is doing what tasks, all of which reduces productivity. Also, this disrupts the ability of new businesses to hire people, i.e., it makes it a lot easier for you to just quit your job, and new businesses often require stability in order to be able to get capital investment, which makes it a lot harder for the economies to grow in general. For all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Great, thank you, Elo. Please go ahead, DPM.
I'll take my POIs in the chat, please. Let's be very clear. During the pandemic, millions and millions of people lost their jobs. OO is delusional if they think that personal savings, family economic support, and unemployment benefits were enough to protect those millions of people and the children and the families who depended on them from poverty, from the loss of homes, from the lack of education, and from the homelessness that many, many people experienced because they had relied on one job in order to protect their livelihoods and the people that depended on them. This prevents that from happening for many, many people, or at least prevents it from happening to such a dramatic extent that they lose all their income. That is enough for us to win this debate. OO's response was totally insufficient. I'm going to ask two questions. Firstly, why people have a better work life when this is the norm. And secondly, why work, especially the most difficult and important to society, will be done better. Firstly, on why people will have a better work life. The opposition focused mainly on job satisfaction and things like that, which I'll get to in a minute, but they totally ignored the most foundational parts of having a good work life, or at least didn't dedicate enough time to it. That is bargaining power and economic security. It is impossible for you to be able to thrive or flourish intellectually in your job or be interested or make friends when you don't have access to these basic rights and basic forms of self-protection, or the knowledge that one day if you need them, they will be there for you. Firstly, bargaining power. All they say to this is a brief discussion of unions at the end. They see people are less likely to join unions if they don't have friends that are there already because they don't spend as much time with those friends. People don't join unions because they have friends in unions. They join unions because they are aware of the economic safety and bargaining power that is likely to get them. In order to educate yourself about that, you don't need to be friends with someone 5 days a week. You merely need to be exposed to the importance of a union, which a simple relationship with someone is, or the union reaching out to you is enough. More importantly, you're less likely to be coerced out of joining a union, like workers at places like Amazon are, when you have other sources of employment, which links us back to the bargaining point. If people know that some employers will continue to support them if they join a union, or is there a backup plan if it backfires, they are more likely to feel supported to join one, and that is the biggest barrier to entry at the moment. But more importantly, once they join one, which is all they have to do for one of their multiple jobs, the barrier to entry is then less for them to join further. There's more likely they'll join one union when they have 3 to pick from. But I'm going to remind you of some of the additional bargaining power points that OO just never deals with. Firstly, the idea that one employer cannot have economic control over your entire life. That often leads to things, particularly with regards to women, like sexual abuse and harassment in the workplace. It is a reason women fear speaking out because they have no other avenue of economic recourse either. Secondly, bosses can't gaslight you into thinking you're bad at your job or you'll never get another one, which young, vulnerable workers are often fall victim to because you have other sources of workplace validation. Secondly, particularly important to bargaining power is you have more skills and experience with which to leverage what you want because you have multiple sources where all those skills are growing at the same time. And that is particularly important. You're not stagnant in one job. Even if one job is bad, you're growing and developing in another. And that brings you bargaining power opposition doesn't respond to. Then moving to economic security. I allude to this in my introduction, but this response was totally inadequate. They cannot rely on personal savings. Most people have none, or family support. Most families have none, in order to remove this material from the debate. Economic safety is better when money is coming from multiple pools that are not necessarily contingent on the success of one industry or on the success of one town. COVID is a perfect example for why relying on one source of income were devastating to multiple families. Moving on to satisfaction, note again, none of this matters if workers don't have access to the base rights and forms of economic support that are the groundwork for satisfaction. They tell us a couple of things here. Firstly, that you don't get as much satisfaction because you hand jobs off to different people and you don't see completion. Handing jobs off to different people at certain points is great. It means that the parts you're not good at, you don't have to figure out how to do. It means the parts you don't find as fulfilling, you don't have to do yourself. It means that you have more control over that which you do. And that is what gives you workplace satisfaction, doing something you like and you're good at, not finishing something to a mediocre standard because you had no one there to help you. Secondly, they say you have to juggle, and doing multiple things at once is stressful. Humans are meant to do multiple things at once. It's not natural that we do 9 to 5 work on the same thing every single day, Monday to Friday. We get enjoyment when our barriers and boundaries are pushed to a healthy extent, when we're exposed to new material. And exposure to new material can make other jobs more enjoyable because you can see how they intersect at different boundaries. Like if you're working in a lab for science, but then you do a little bit of practical application, it means both of your jobs are more fulfilling because you understand how they intersect with other industries and applications of it. But if it's true that jobs are menial, that means it's less difficult to change between them and it's also less stressful. Lastly, on overtime, the norm changes the expectation that jobs hold over you when they only have you for a certain period of time. They don't have total ownership and control over your life. I'll take a POI from closing.
So for a lot of your benefits to manifest, your framing on how you're going to have lots of different jobs and lots of different sectors has to be true. But isn't that just unrealistic considering time and like limits on talent?
No, that's not the case. Most individuals are not specialized. They have general skills that they're able to bring to jobs like administrative work, like building and construction, like general understandings of science or medicine, which are broadly applicable to lots of things. Most people aren't specialists, which is why a lot of people already, usually in low SES groups, already do this. It's better if they get support from everyone doing it as well. So satisfaction is increased when you have more to gain from, when you have exposure to more people and more things. Lastly, why work will be done better. They say there's less likely to be specialization, but as I allude to, when you're able to see the way in which your work applies in a broad variety of fields, specialization is better. When a lawyer is able to work in the corporate field and spend 1 day a week working for legal aid, that is better for their understanding of justice. Lastly, productivity. This links directly to satisfaction. People are more productive when they enjoy their work and when they know it is not the only thing they have to do. They can see a clear endpoint. For the reasons of productivity, of enjoyment, and most importantly, economic security, we win this debate.
Thank you, DPM. Please go ahead, DLO.
Am I clearly audible?
You are.
Okay, POIs exclusively in the chat. Three things in the speech. First, worker rights. Second, economic growth. And third, job satisfaction. One on worker rights. The core claim from opening government is you have more bargaining power over employers because you can ensure you're not hurt by being fired, so you have some insulation. We flip this argument in 4 ways. Flip number 1, you are more likely to get fired. Why? Because you are working fewer hours, meaning each worker is a lot less valuable to an individual company and a lot more replaceable, i.e. if you only work 3 hours, then you can lose 3 hours of work by firing someone. What this means is outside contexts like recession, where, by the way, you would probably lose all 3 of your jobs, a company is far more likely to, when engaging in a small amount of downsizing, actively fire you. So even if you have some insulation on being fired is still a serious problem for you because it reduces your ability to make up those 3 or 4 hours of wages, and you are simply more likely to be fired. So the people who are losing their job means you don't get access to the savings that opening government cares about. Flip number 2, this reduces the political will to give insulation to those who are fired, like severance pay. That is, if there is a general narrative that people have other jobs they can rely on, then there is less likely to be political pressure to push some jobs to do things like input severance pay. Crucially, when the privileged rely on one job and get fired, the privileged also have incentives to push for severance pay. In contrast, the privileged also know that they lose tax money if they do something like push regulations on employers and enforce those regulations because there are enforcement costs on the state. So if a privileged person has 4 jobs and they get fired from one, they are fine because their 3 jobs still give them more than enough. In contrast, when a low-income person loses one of their three or one of their 4 jobs, they lose a huge amount of money, but they've lost the privileged campaigners who would also push for things like severance pay regulations or job security legislation that would ensure they either get to keep their jobs or they get some savings in the aftermath of a transition from one job to another. The weighing is, during times of recession like COVID-19, all 3 of your jobs would have probably fired you, except on their side of the house, there is no political will to do something like put in place a regulation to give you access to severance pay. Flip number 3, higher wages mean little when literally going to your job accumulates your poverty. And this is where they don't engage with any of David's analysis. We explained that your cost of living is a lot higher at the point where, number 1, you literally have to commute from one job to one job to one job. And the cost of gas, even if trivial in one instance of transport, accumulates over time and makes it much harder for you to even afford to go to work, i.e. jobs become a cause of poverty at the point where you have to buy a car to even get a job. Number two, the fact that there is less time, i.e. there is time in commuting between jobs, there is time in doing things like training and adapting from one job to another, is working hours lost, meaning you earn lower wages. Number 3, the cost of training, i.e. HR departments have to deal with the processing of way more people, means corporations lose economies of scale and spend way more money on HR departments. Where do you think they're getting that money? Often by cutting worker wages because they literally can't. Weighing against bargaining power, even if workers have more bargaining power, so companies have an incentive to pay them. If they physically can't pay them, then that outweighs the incentives of companies. Flip number 4. In more cases, you don't have a job in the first place. The new expectation for specialization favors the privileged. They say, most people aren't specialists. I'm sorry, each job requires one skill. If their characterization is true and an engineer is now doing accounting as well, i.e. you are applying skill, doing different jobs, and each job is fairly specialized, especially in the modern economy, it is highly likely that this favors those who have access to something like a holistic university education that taught them many skills, rather than being a low-income worker who hasn't gone to university and takes time to pick up multiple different skills and apply them differently in different jobs. Therefore, a poor person is less likely to get a job in the first place, and this outweighs the cost of being fired. Because at least if you held down a job and then got fired, you accumulated money for it. But if you don't get a job, you don't have a source of money in the first place. Their second claim is workers are being able to communicate about whether they're being exploited in this job relative to other jobs. Coordination among workers worsens. The first reason is you're less likely to join unions. Number 1, you only want to join one union. If one employer gives you health insurance, why will you join the unions of your other 2 employers to get health insurance from them too? Number 2, you have to pay union dues to 3 different unions, and this cost adds up over time, so you only join one. Number 3, participating in a strike requires time spent protesting and time spent negotiating with your one employer, which you can't do if you have to commute to your other place of work, which also means you're less likely to join multiple unions, so a lot of unions are disempowered. Number 2, coordination is much harder because often the optimal policy for a job differs from one job to another job, meaning voters have to bundle a lot more political issues in their head and are much less able to make specific demands or vote upon these demands, which reduces their political power. Number three, voters have a stronger economic interest in big corporations because now no one is just hired by a small business. You almost certainly have a job with a big corporation as well, meaning the company has leverage over you. Number four, you have weaker relationships with other workers. CG says you're equally likely to get sick of them. No, you have incentives to try not to get sick of them, and strong relationships with workers is important to do things like negotiate and push an employer for more pay. Finally, they say having multiple jobs is normal for poor people. At least we reduce their stigmatization. No, the lack of a norm means if poor people work multiple jobs, they are at least seen as hard workers. If poor people working multiple jobs is just a normal thing, they are much more likely to be blamed for being lazy. Therefore, we outweigh their claims on worker regulation. Second, on global productivity and inequality. There are two ways they worsen inequality. One, they slow down migration both locally and internationally. If you want to get a visa on their side of the house, you have to hope that multiple employers in a country are individually able to sponsor you rather than just one employer. High-skilled immigrants may get this, but low-skilled immigrants, therefore, are much less likely to be able to get someone to sponsor their visa and migrate. This damages developing countries. The reason why is people are more productive in developed countries and gain a huge wage premium. They often send that money back to their families back home through processes like remittances. As a result, on their side of the house, developing countries get less access to remittances. This is crucial because remittances are able to bypass the political process and ensure that poor people in developing countries have money on their hands that they can spend and create jobs. Second, they slow down urbanization in developing countries. If you can take on multiple short jobs in a village, you're much less likely to migrate to an urban area and leave your job in a farm, which is the key prerequisite for foreign companies to invest in developing countries when they can go to an agglomeration economy in an urban area. What that means is billions of people in the most vulnerable places don't get jobs in the first place. Compare this with their claims on productivity and job satisfaction. One, they talk about flexibility and getting maternity leave. This actually reduces pressure to create systems to give them flexibility, i.e. rich people don't lobby for maternity leave policies at the state level anymore because they have multiple jobs and therefore can just take some time off one of their jobs. However, for poor people, you can't take your time off even one job because each job, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, is critical for you to meet your needs. Second, they say this is a difficult job. You don't have to do it all the time. You can now take breaks and recuperate. But take breaks from what? Either your skill is being a nurse, i.e. you're a nurse multiple times, or you have even less of a break because after a really stressful surgery, you now have to go to a totally different job and adapt there. The weighing is simple. Developing countries, they slow the industrial transition, they shut out the ability of workers to migrate and send remittances back home, and they shut out the meaningful negotiation ability of workers to push for rights for themselves. On their side of the house, there's far more unemployment we are proud to oppose.
Thank you, DLO. Please go ahead, member of Gov.
Hello, this is a close camera angle. I'll take POIs in chat. If I ever cut off, just tell me. Start. Debates like this always run into this strange chicken and egg problem, where one side will list a host of structural reasons for why some broad macro societal impact occurs, and another side will give you a set of reasons for why that won't happen, with neither side really identifying what the norm fundamentally changes. On CG, then, the extension will be twofold. The first thing we will look at is people who are forced to break out the norm, which is what I know OG says in a one-liner in PM, but never really builds on. We'll explain how the way they're viewed by society changes, and why it becomes easier for them to access general skills training and upskilling, which is the prerequisite to believing they'd have any of the leverage OG promises. The second thing I'll do is weigh up what kind of job security and leverage actually matters to the average worker, assuming why even if you lose some fulfillment and connection coming from OO, your life is still on net far more fulfilling and beneficial. Before any of that, though, I do think there's a lot of housekeeping that needs to be done. So what kinds of industries will different types of people work in, and how diverse is it likely to be? I think even in a world where the norm is more working multiple jobs, highly specialized, educated, and engaging white-collar work is still likely to be high-paying enough that the most privileged people in society don't need to work very different jobs, even in a world where there is a norm. What this means is that all of OO's arguments about making friends, finishing your tasks, being a good corporate slave, and dipping into your small $1 million savings account when times get hard apply to a very different set of people to the blue-collar, low-skill workers that OG is talking about, who are likely to work in a very different set of industries as they already do in status quo. This also means, importantly, that the mechanisms OO runs about having the political will of the privileged on your side is out of the ground, because they assume that the privileged will be working multiple jobs in a diverse array of industries, which simply isn't likely to be the case. So when there is a big shock to the labor force, these people are still likely to be insulated, which means you aren't likely to receive those benefits. First extension then, what happens to the people who will be forced to go against the norm on either side of the house? Who are the people who go against the norm norm and status quo. I think these are the people who are the most vulnerable, the people who are left without the choice. Importantly, these are the people who require extra income, never had the opportunities to receive specialized skills, need to move around a lot because of their family situation, and importantly, probably never have the time to leave their jobs and gain new skills that would be required for them to climb the social ladder. In the counterfactual, as I explained, the norm breakers are likely to be the people who are already the most privileged, people who don't need to work at multiple part-time jobs because they have an augmented source of income. These are people who can specialize despite social norms and who can afford a higher education and are probably extremely passionate of what they do already. What this would suggest then is, on the way up, you should consider what happens to the people who are currently marginalized in status quo, even if it comes to some disbenefit to the norm breakers on people inside opposition. Why is this world better for these people? 3 reasons. 1, it means increased access to social support systems for a kind of lifestyle that requires multiple jobs. And this is the prerequisite to OG's case, right? Because they assert that you have more leverage because you can switch jobs, but never explain why you'll have the capacity to switch jobs. Like, if you're a janitor, it doesn't automatically equate that you'll also have the skills to become a cashier or to become a fry cook, for instance. The difference is, in a world where the norm, that is where the political will manifests for skill training and retraining facilities. Because more people are doing this, you uniquely have the leverage, not just for skill training in specific industries like BPO in the Philippines, but for a broad and diverse set of industries that people now want to work in. That means, A, you have more adaptation and more ability to move into new industries as things phase in and out of fashion and get more ride the economic tides. But B, it also means you're less likely to hang on to problematic and dangerous industries. Blue collar workers, like people in the coal industry, no longer become political cannon fodder for political parties like the Republicans who say we need to protect these things for workers' rights. It's far easier to promote transitions and identify industries that are harming society writ large. OO's preemption, I guess, here is to say there's less political will for things like severance pay. A, this is nonsense, because your argument before this is literally that more people will get fired, which probably means more people will be in demand of severance pay or some type of short-term job seeker allowance. But secondly, I just suggest this is far worse in status quo, where the people who are reliant on job seekers allowance are less supported and don't have the facilities necessary to transition into a different job once they are fired. The second impact, or the second reason this is broadly good for these marginalized groups, is because it corrects many of the hiring biases against marginalized groups that is predicated on the view of them as risky. This looks like hiring managers who often view minorities as being more prone to switching jobs, or who view women who have to take maternity leave as far riskier and feeling that they need to hire them less. In a world where there's far lower opportunity cost to hiring people to work multiple, because more people will be able to fill that role because more people fill multiple jobs, we think there's likely to be far less resistance to this, and it's likely far easier for these people to transition back into the workplace, even if they are removed under the worst circumstances. The third thing I'd point out is this just corrects the social stigma against the people who have to work multiple jobs, which affects their access to opportunities. The one line you hear from OO is, oh, at least they're seen as hard workers. Your pity does very little for these people. In reality, what they need is the social support and capital that only comes with critical mass in a world where this is a norm. For all of these reasons, and because these people are the most important, as I explained in framing, this puts us above top half debate, even if you are uncertain as to what leverage you get on either side. I'll take opening before second extension.
Critical mass is far less important than accumulating the support of people with the maximum amount of economic privilege, and their stigmatization of these people worsens at the point where they seem poorer but are doing the same things as them, meaning they can easily paint them as lazy.
Yeah, but this PY is a bit of a trick, right? Because I explain you don't get the concentrated political will of people in privilege because these people still work in areas where they are sheltered. So if the comparative is smaller critical mass versus greater critical mass distributed across industries, on the way up, we're still winning. Second then, how does society's relationship with work change, and why are workers' lives more fulfilling? So I just want to play ball quickly with the opening debate about hard benefits. I think what's more important than just gaining leverage and perhaps being able to argue for more pay is being able to mitigate financial shocks, which provide the most utility for you. In this world, you're seen as less risky, which means it's easier for you to access capital. There are probably lower insurance premiums on you because you have some ability to mitigate that risk. Secondly, it also means you're increased to a wider array of industries and the issues plaguing them, which means that unions and organizations are more likely to be intersectional rather than consolidated into a single industry responding to OO. It's not that you would have to pay 3 membership dues. You'd have to pay a single membership due to a union that covers covers multiple types of work, which I think is the far more likely scenario. But finally, I think you just feel far less regret and pressure over your career and life choices. Many people make many mistakes at the early stages of their career. They feel locked in and they feel shamed whenever they want to change their jobs. For many of the people, this is the realist impact in the round. The comparative makes it easier for opt-out and makes it easier for structures to go around them, allow them to opt out. For all of these reasons, propose.
Great. Thank you, member of Gov. Please go ahead, member of Op.
Hello, can I take my POIs in chat, please? I will drink some water first. Starting my speech now. Living in a capitalistic society means that you are forced to work to survive. We are living in this endless hell of earning a monthly wage so we can pay rent and earn money for food until the day we die. The question of this debate is which side makes the grind more bearable, and the argument from CO is that having a one-time full-time job allows individuals to derive more meaning from their labor. The first clarification I want to make is what kind of work will be part-time. This debate is not about all part-time work or all full-time work. I know it's a prefers or worse motion, but the economy will always have both because you can't have a part-time CEO. Part-time work will be work that companies can outsource to independent contractors. So this is going to look like repair work, being a waiter, being a Grab delivery driver, all the things we see in status quo. Core functions that are sensitive, such as marketing planning or operation management, can never be made part-time, and Gov doesn't have the fiat for that. So in terms of the options for part-time work, you can't do the things that you're passionate about. You can't do things that you find interesting. You have to pick between these options, which are all mundane and menial labor. If their argument was doing things that are interesting to you because you need more variety in life, recognize that even within working a full-time job, you can do things like digital art or write songs. It's unclear why people can't do this in their free time, but the comparative here is that people are going to hate their hobbies if they constantly have to worry about finding the next customer they have to sell their digital art to. First extension, how is meaning constructed? 3 reasons. First, through interpersonal relations. I know OO says this, but the analysis is that because you spend more time with them, and then CG says you might not like them even though you spend a lot of time with them. Here's the contribution in CO. It's about a sense of community. When you're in a place for a long period of time, this is where you build attachment. This is why many people, even if they dislike their country or their school environment, still have some form of attachment to it. Therefore, even if you dislike your co-workers, you still feel a sense of belonging. This is where we also flip the opening government, because we posit to you that it's the routine and the repetition that allows people to integrate it into their identity and for communities to form. Given that community is an important part of self-actualization, feeling a sense of belonging and being part of this community is important for people to derive meaning. We think that this is a benefit. Second way in which people derive meaning, through feeling like your actions are meaningful and have impact. Two layers of analysis here. The first, we think that this is easier to access when you're working a full-time job because individuals can construct their purpose around helping a company grow or successfully finishing a project. Compared to part-time work where you never feel a part of something bigger because you're constantly working for different employees like a mercenary. This is where individuals work for the sake of earning money, which is extremely depressing. At least on the outside, they have the illusion that they're contributing to a greater project and helping this great company or institution progress and earn more money. But also, second layer of analysis is through achievement. Being able to get career progression is something that people can derive meaning from. They can look back and see how their job titles have progressed, how they've been able to increase their salary, how they've been able to get more respect from their co-workers. These are tangible ways in which people can see that their actions have had meaning, that the last 10 years of their life wasn't wasted on doing absolutely nothing, and that there's something to show for it. On the side of government, when you're constantly doing different part-time projects, it's very abstract and difficult to define the progress you have made. Sure, your skills might have increased, but again, it's very abstract and difficult to tell when your skills have improved. Compared to outside, there are tangible markers when you've got career progression, when you have got promoted, that shows that you have achieved something. This is where people can derive meaning. Last reason is through identity. Well, we think working a full-time job means that you can use that full-time job as a source of identity for many people. Saying that you are a chef, saying you're a consultant or an accountant, or that you're a marketing manager. People can take pride in their occupations when they're working a full-time job. This forms the basis of people to form an identity in a capitalistic society, especially when they are defined through your labor anyways. On the side of government, you're defined as a gig worker. You're defined as a part-timer who work all of these different jobs, which means that your identity is fractured between all of the million different things that you do. Again, people cannot form an identity around it. Here's the conclusion. Work sucks, and whether you work a 9-to-5 job or whether you're working 3 part-time shifts, it's going to suck on both sides of the house. The point that CEO makes is that at least with a full-time job, we make the nightmare of capitalism more bearable because we've identified ways in which people can derive meaning from this madness. But even if meaning is derived outside of labor, recognize that full-time jobs better facilitate that. When you get things like bonuses, paid vacation, healthcare insurance, those are things that create pockets of time where you can spend time with your family and friends and go on vacation. They don't get their security on their side of the house because when you take a break from part-time work, you are literally earning zero income. So on outside of the house is where we get pleasure vows for people to release the stress of the endless grind of capitalism. Opening opposition says that people can get better at their work, but I'm not sure why this is the impact in this debate. We explain why this is more meaningful to individuals. Recognize how this impact interacts with opening government, who says work is boring when repeated. But their side also has mundane work because they're working things like being a barista or being a Grab delivery driver. So by their own analysis, work being mundane, people don't get happy. What we told you uniquely in my extension is that people derive meaning from things like achievement, interpersonal relations, seeing that your work has impact, and using your work as a source of identity. Notice that none of this is contingent on the type of work that you do. It's contingent on spending a lot of time in one singular place where you can form meaning around it. The opening government claim here is that employers currently have too much power. Three responses. First, this is largely symmetric. Corporations on their side are still hiring, even if you do part-time work, and they decide things like your pay, your job scope, and they can choose to not renew your contract, leaving you jobless next month. Two layers here. The first, corporations can collude to set certain market rates, so you can't even choose to work a different part-time job because all of the market rates are paying the same. Second layer, unions are less strong on their side of the house because people don't know how long they'll be working in this corporation. So CG can't just fiat and say because it's a prefers the world's motion, therefore it will accommodate part-time work. When people are constantly switching jobs and constantly switching industries, they do not know how long they will be in that industry, and therefore they're never invested enough in that industry to even go and attend those union meetings in the first place. Second argument about workers' protections. Things like insurance payments, vacation leaves, and anti-discriminatory laws are things that already exist in status quo, whereas the government bench has to do in the analytical work to show why it might exist in this hypothetical world. So if employers are shitty on both sides of the house, at least on our side we have more protection. Given that Gov supports a world where the proportion of work is part-time, this means that there are lesser full-time slots, which means there are lesser people can benefit from the protections of full-time work. Before I move on, I will take a POI from closing.
Seems like there are very few people who actually gain a sense of achievement from their jobs, but many people who feel like their job is mundane. Isn't it better that social norms cater to the many people who feel like their job is mundane and tell them it's okay, rather than the few people who feel like, oh yeah, the grind, bro?
No, but we've given you many other reasons as to how people can derive meaning and not just through achievements, but also you can make micro achievements within the workplace, even if you are not like earning a lot of money. Employers have an incentive to retain employees. There are 5 reasons for this, and this interacts nicely with opening government, who says that your employers have too much power. First, companies invest heavily in acquiring and training employees, and so it's not financially wise to let people go. Experienced employees are often able to boost productivity of a company because they can work multiple functions. Second reason, companies don't want to get negative PR from mass retrenchment and therefore want to retain their workers. Third reason, companies don't want their workers to be acquired by their competitors and therefore want to retain workers. Fourth reason, companies believe that happy workers are efficient workers, so that it's a positive incentive to improve workers' welfare. And fifth reason is that COVID-19 and the aging population means that there's a manpower shortage, which means that employees have more bargaining power. Given that we have proven that companies have 5 reasons to retain employees, we mitigate the harms from opening government that says that employers have too much power. But the conclusion is this: it's in part-time work where companies suddenly decide that next month they no longer need your services. It's suddenly next month you're unable to find a contract or you're unable to find a gig. So if both sides of the house has mundane work, at least on our side we don't have economic precarity where the next month you might not be able to pay your rent because you cannot get a contract. But notice how job precarity is intrinsic to part-time work, and CG can't just fiat this away because companies don't want to permanently be reliant on part-time workers. Part-time workers are like based on demand surges, and then you hire someone to come in. I am aware it's 37, so I will not elaborate on this further. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Member Vought. Please go ahead, GovWhip.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate isn't about whether or not it's better for individuals to work a part-time job or a full-time job. Because clearly, as CO even points out, if a person was sufficiently dedicated and ultimately had the means, they would be perfectly capable of opting either or and achieving the vast majority of benefits suggested by the opening debate. Ultimately, as Toby suggests, the most important part about this debate is the macro structures that force people who don't want to stick to part-time jobs or full-time jobs or the vice versa, i.e. the people who are going to be excluded by going against the norm that is not in their personal interest. These are things like the capacity for whether or not unions could hire individuals who work part-time or full-time, and what are the intersectional implications of the people who work part-time or full-time, whether it be racial, gender, etc., but also the structures of education, whether or not your school has the capacity to give you an education that allows you to work multiple jobs or gives you transferable skills, or even things like the banking and loan sectors, which probably wouldn't give you money if they thought that you were working a part-time jobs, which they saw as something that was ultimately lesser and fundamentally less secure. This is the real change in this debate because people's preferences could be absolutely random. The only thing that actually creates a marginal effect is how these preferences interact with the norm of society. in which case I will talk about two important things. The first aspect about economic security and why we're going to be much better off, and the second about why people not just would potentially be happier, but rather would probably be ingrained with a much greater sense of happiness coming from closing government. Let's talk about economic stability. So on opposition side in general, they kind of have three main points shared across the bench. The first one, that ultimately these jobs are going to be much more secure in terms of lobbying because of unions. Secondly, they're going to be macroly more efficient on a scale. And thirdly, that they give you some degree of specialization, which makes you a much higher earning employer overall. Let's tackle these three things individually. First of all, let's talk about lobbying. So there's a deadlock in the opening debate about whether or not there actually is more lobbying from unions. Government gives like 16,000 reasons to why it's true. Also give the same 16,000 reasons why it's not true. I think the reason why we can break this deadlock in CG is not just talking about the specific individual power of unions, but two important things that Toby brings you. One, how unions are likely going to evolve given the change in the norm. So we agree with OO. It would be absolutely ridiculous for a person to pay 5, 6, 7 union fees in order to try and compensate for the amount of jobs that are going to be created. This is exactly the analytical reason to suggest that unions are going to take a far more macro scale in this debate, i.e. that unions would apply across jobs, typically going to segregate themselves across things like region, profession, like general bar exams, etc., that have general coalition of lawyers, doctors, manufacturing workers, etc., which likely means that these unions as a whole operate as a collective versus the individual nature that they would operate in status quo. This analysis already boxes out the vast majority of what OO has to say, because it could potentially be the case that ultimately there's a lot easier of a time for employers to fire people, but to the extent that conversely the unions become much larger, much more powerful, then I would suggest that it is in those instances where the employers across the board have to negotiate with unions as opposed to seeing people as individuals who they could potentially threaten with a lot of the economic leverage they have in status quo. But secondly, even if you don't believe that, right now, unions don't include so many people. So whether or not you believe that unions work, you probably do believe that unions typically exclude things like women, marginalized communities, primarily because the norm suggests that these people are not full-time workers, are not as important. So i.e., they're never offered the opportunity to join a union because they're not seen as full-time employees, or even in the instances where they actually get in, they have no effect on politics because people simply discredit them by saying, you're not going to be in here for the long haul, your opinions don't matter, which is why you see massive amounts of backslash or lack of push for things like women's rights and maternal leave, especially within unions. This is particularly important because we may not know whether or not unions get better or stronger, but to the extent that we on CG prove that at the very least, unions include people who were not included before, therefore a lot of the things that unions do achieve in the status quo get transferred to people who are significantly more vulnerable, and therefore we're able to protect people much better. But secondly, how about this whole macro inefficiency case and the lobbying about the rich, etc.? Why does Toby also blow this out of the water? Because he recognizes that while, of course, there's going to be a general idea that people are going to be diversified, clearly people with doctorates, master's degrees are going to self-select into jobs that are generally similar to what they would already have been taking, and therefore create a large degree of security that they would have not had previously had. This massively changes a lot of those internal systems, because to the extent that it is middle class and lower class workers who experience the largest degree of diversity, this is actually where we leverage the greatest amount of democratic will. Because while, yes, those people have some degree of insulation, to the extent that a lot of the processes to lobby for reforms, both internally within the company and for the state, are things that are majoritarian, to the extent that we start separating the middle class from the wealthy, and we cease seeing ourselves as individuals who are all in favor of trying to maintain the norm, trying to pursue the state, and to allowing us to continue all of the functions such as working from home, working part-time, etc. It is in this instance where we actually shift the allocation of political capital to being the middle class and the rich who are professionals to the lower class and the middle class, thus giving that comparative advantage. Before I move on, I'd like to take a PY from OG.
Even in your best case that you get the types of skills training that you claim you get, this skills training can actually be a bad thing, because if workers in developed countries have a large set of skills, then there is never any incentive to move to developing countries and outsource labor from there. Therefore, your extension might actually be a bad thing rather than a good thing.
I'm really not too compelled by this argument, right? Because presumably developed countries have their own demographic problems. Are people getting older? You're going to need more workers. I think right now the problem is actually there's underemployment. But the second thing is also to suggest you're missing the comparative, which is to suggest that within developing countries, there are a lot of jobs that are very high skill, but they're on a particularly wealthy portion of the population. Presumably, it is much better for the people who are not sharing on the developmental wealth to be able to diversify, opt into unions, and lobby for the things that they were not able to do traditionally. But finally, on the issue of happiness. So I think OO kind of tries to get away and says there are potential reasons to why you would be more happy working multiple jobs. But it is only Toby who gives the analytical proof to why this is important. It is specifically that when you as a worker, regardless of how the macro cultural things might shift, would always be risk averse. It's a biological tendency. People have an adverse reaction to pain. So to the extent that mitigation is far more than any potential government benefit, there's only CG who proves that risk aversion is something that you would value, not could value. But secondly, because you would probably be raised up in the society where this is the norm, you'd probably then only choose to value the fact that you can opt into multiple jobs when those macro societal changes choose you to do so in school, etc. With that, I'm proud to.
Great. Thank you, GovWhip. Please go ahead, OpWhip.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I will take POIs through chat. I'll try to take one from opening for diagonal engagement. Okay. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Unions are irrelevant in this debate. One, no team proves why they have such a big impact, but secondly, CJ is correct to say that they probably adjust depending on the norm. That's not the relevant clash in the debate. I'm going to do a quick piece of framing that we told you in member and why that's really, really important in the debate as to what these jobs are likely to look like. Because I think it's unrealistic for OG to say you're going to be a lawyer, a scientist, and a doctor all at the same time, so you're going to get lots of skills and you're going to get out of the city. That's probably just not going to happen. This narrative isn't a magic wand that suddenly allows you to be good at all of these 3 different jobs that requires very, very specialized skills. DPM says you have a broad understanding of science. If that was the case, I would be a scientist and I would be making COVID vaccines right now. But this is a lie, right? CJ is correct to say that there are 2 different groups of people that we are talking about. So the privileged people are probably going to be fine on both sides. What we're talking about then is people who are vulnerable. Clearly, throwing these people who don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot of transferable skills around different jobs isn't going to mean that they're going to become good at those jobs. It just means that they're going to get exploited in every single one of those jobs. And if you're the poorest of institutions, and if you're from the poorest of areas, those schools probably do not have the capacity or the money to afford microstructure education or to afford you to have access to 50 different subjects within your high school because for the simple version that they are poor and do not have these resources. And if they did, let's say that they did, that also means we have that same degree of political capital to allow these individuals to specialize in certain fields, take AP classes, take IB classes, so they're good at something and they can go to a company where they're able to go up that social ladder and make lots of money. What this means in the debate is that on our side, you can uniquely use these types of specialized skills to continue your family business, to protect the cultures and work in the companies that treat you the best, to work in places where you have inherent talents and where you have inherent skills, to work with the people that you care about and love the most. And that's the independent benefit that quite cleanly wins the debate. I'm going to talk about 3 questions in the speech. First, on seeking happiness. Secondly, on increasing capital. And secondly, on bargaining chips for workers. Firstly, let's talk about happiness. And this is the most important clash in the debate because as MG correctly identifies, this is the realest and the most tangible impact for the people on the ground. This is the most objective benefit you get. Everything else that opening talks about is speculative at best. Why do we win on this? 2 layers. 1, regarding relationships. So we can see that you might meet more people on government sides. You might have more access to different types of people. But what's important in a relationship is that this is not the tipping point that makes relationships good or bad. If you're an annoying person that no one likes, whether you go to a school with 500 people or 5,000 people, you will just never make friends there because everyone in those 5,000 people find you annoying. But what relationships are about then is knowing that you need to deal with these people for long amounts of time. So it's making sure you treat them better. It's bringing them treats after you go on a vacation. It's bringing your coworker coffee and putting in a slow but active effort to making these good relationships because you know in your head that you're going to have to deal with these people for long amounts of time and you don't want to stray those relationships, which is obviously a lot easier if you have less people you need to deal with than more people you need to deal with because the amount of effort you need to put in and the amount of people you need to deal with is significantly less on our side. And this is the most important impact in the debate because what we told you in member was specifically about community building because regardless of whether the people within your community are good or bad, that's speculative. But the people you are able to meet and create bonds with and the communities that you're able to be involved in that bring you stability and happiness is the objective benefit. For individuals that have family and friends, this is probably symmetric, but this is high impact for those individuals that do not have community in other places, that find community and fulfillment within their workplaces, which is a lot of people who are really, really lonely in their 20s to 30s, which I probably wouldn't know about, but apparently that's the case for a lot of individuals. The second thing we told you, and the second layer under this, was that you were able to opt out of bad jobs. And this directly flips what CG told you in extension. Because sure, people make mistakes. And yes, clearly companies are going to give you money, but companies are more likely to hire you if you had a manager role before, rather than if you have three part-time job beforehand, because these skills you learned in being a manager was probably a lot more transferable and valuable than the 3 mediocre skills you got at being in a part-time job that wasn't very important for you. In conclusion, people inherently look for external and tangible ways to get validation and to feel proud about what they do, and that is a lot harder in the competitive, and that is the objective benefit that wins the debate. Secondly, let's talk about money and who has more of it. Because the extent that OG talks about this is saying that you have more flexibility, you have lots of money. O says that you have family and savings, but I think OG is to correct that not everyone has this. But they also needed to prove, OO needed to prove that these other 2 low-income jobs, OG needed to prove that these other 2 low-income jobs are going to be sufficient to pay for all these other things. Because look, if I make $20 a day being a janitor and I make $20 a day being a convenience store worker, clearly those 2 low-paying jobs aren't going to be enough for my rent. So they needed to be comparative here, because as DPM says, these are basic rights. Having financial security and stability is the prerequisite to getting any benefits, like joining a union or having a say against your company. And we uniquely told you why we're likely to get this on our side of the house. But even if we don't get this, you're more likely to get when you most need it. Because when you're older, when you are more risk averse, it is when you need to pay for your kids to go to university and you are getting retired and you're slowly losing money. This is when you need money the more. This is when you need money the most, right? Because when you this is what's really, really important, that you have relationships around you that you've had for long amounts of time. This is when you're more likely to be high. Then this is uniquely on our side. You're more likely to be at places of higher levels of that corporation. Because even if the amount of money you make right now with those 3 part-time jobs is enough, specifically when you need it the most, when you're in COVID, when you get cancer, when you're in an accident, when you COVID strike, this is the safety net on our side of the house that you're able to get, of having connection within your company for long amounts of time, of having trust within those people who are able to support you and pay for you, and that's really important. The conclusion of this is that it's in a part-time job, right? The conclusion of this is that it's in a part-time work where the company could suddenly decide next month that they no longer need your services. So if both sides have shitty work, at least on our side, we don't have the economic precarity of not having income 1 month and not being able to pay rent. But notice how job precarity is intrinsic to part-time work. Companies don't want to be permanently reliant on part-timers. They hire them when demand increases for certain projects. So job precarity is part of their system in itself and only really happens on our side during a recession or because of shit employers. CJ says society would have adjusted to accommodate it. 2 things. A, but reality is against them, right? Most people are not part of the gig economy right now, and yet there isn't changes to help them. But B, the point still remains is that you'll always have to look for the next job or the next contract, which is very, very tiring and anxiety inducing for these individuals. Lastly, let's talk about bargaining chips. I think DLO's 4 flips deal with OG quite well, and they're quite clearly out of the debate. Let's deal with then CG's extension, because CG's extension here is that poor people are going to exist on both sides, but now you get microstructures for the people. We take this out in this extension, in our extension, where we tell you that companies inherently have an incentive to want to give this to workers anyway on our side of the house, because you don't want to lose these individuals' talent and you don't want their secret leaks. But on their side, because these skills are so transferable and they could just get kicked off of your company the next day, companies don't want to give this to you anymore because they're no longer a valuable asset to their company. Here's the weighing of incentives then, because if it's true that companies want to save money, that they probably don't want to give you lots of structures and support, that's symmetric. But the higher incentive for these companies is that you have workers in the first place, because without workers, you cannot do anything. And that's why companies are so scared of things like strikes. But even if we can see that companies in status quo currently do not want to give these structures, that doesn't happen on their side either, for all the reasons of capacity that I mentioned to you in my clarification of framing. So here's the deadlock breaker at the end. When something is a norm, you get desensitized to it being impressive. So the only reason why we try to give people that are working lots of jobs right now lots of support and other ways of getting money is because we see them as uniquely vulnerable. When everyone else does this, they lose that sense of vulnerability. We no longer have an incentive to support them as much, and that's really important. For all those reasons, CEO.
Great. Thank you so much, Opwhip, and thank you everybody for what was a really enjoyable debate. We're gonna go delib now. Panelists meet me in a Discord channel, probably just like the first one. And then good luck in the break.